All right, I'm going to kind of freehand this video, so excuse the wobbly camera work. So I had a subscriber or somebody left a comment in one of my videos asking to break down a run or some trout water, how I read it, how I break down the water, how I fish it, how I look at it and approach it. Really good question. So I'm going to try to explain this and edit this out so it makes sense. So this is my best attempt on video to explain how I go about breaking down a piece of water. On this it's a small creek here, it's not big water, and it's a fairly small pool right now. However, the same rules apply if I'm in a big river and a big pool, or if I'm in a tiny little creek and a tiny pool. The same principles pretty much go back and forth. The only thing is maybe the fish movement's a little shorter, or everything is just compressed or just bigger depending on the size of the water we're working with. So I'm going to start at the top of the run here. Okay, I'm on the top of a run, right where the water breaks into the rift. Usually this water right here breaks into the rift. I'm going to come back and revisit that, but I'm going to kind of break this pool down how it would start during the day. Let's say I'm coming out in late afternoon, early evening, and I'm going to fish until dark. So you can see up here in the rift water, and this rift water is highly oxidated, and 90% of the bugs grow here. So this is really kind of the buggy spot of the whole run. So when I'm up in here and I come in the first part of the day, I'm going to be looking at this water, this rift water, and this is where I might start out fishing nymphs on the bottom, assuming that some of these fish are going to come up here and they're going to be like with this bright light, they're going to be running for cover, trying to get away from the cover, or excuse me, get away from the sunlight, looking for cover, tucking in here, getting some predator protection, but yet be able to snack on an odd bug drifting through here. So I probably would fish this starting out with nymphs. I'll just kind of nip it and whatever's going on hatching. Of course, this time of year we're about midway through our sulfur hatch, so I'll probably run little pheasant tails, small hares, ears, maybe a few sulfur, yellowback, something that's about ready to emerge, and just experiment, maybe some little caddis stuff. All that's happening right here, and your generic nymphs work really good. Probably would indicate a fish it, break it down, and I might work through it a couple of times. Just because I didn't get something through the first time doesn't mean I might pick a fish up on the second time. So this rift water is where I generally start. There's fish kind of hanging in here. Your active fish are here. All right, this is what I call mid-rift. The water's not as fast, but it's still kicking along pretty good. You can tell there's places here where the phone's moving kind of walking pace, and then the phone's almost hardly ever moving. A lot of seams and edges in here. This is probably a more fishier part of the run right in here. This is actually the part that I might concentrate more towards when the bugs start to hatch, because a lot of your bugs will wash out that fast water and end up kind of stalling out in here. So this will be, once the nymph drift happens, this will be a primarily feeding section of the pool right in here. Or I should say not pool, but the rift section. It's just a little softer, just a little deeper. It's got a lot more water structure, bottom structure to it, a lot more places for the fish to get shelter from both predators and from current, and then be able to get food. So this will be probably where I would be hanging out until I really see a lot of fish coming up. Also keep in mind, with all these little seams and edges, you can get a lot of risers in here. So actually this could be great early in the hatch or through the hatch, where I'll be getting a lot of activity, dry fly fishing, fishing the duns, the classic, you know, our dun patterns, dry fly fishing right into here. And as it kind of tails out, this is probably more where you're going to find a lot of your activity. Also, keep in mind too, you don't want to get into this. You want to stay kind of backing out of this water at all times too, because you could have fish that could have been right up in the head of the pool. They're going to start moving. Your fish are going to start moving. It gets towards dusk and the bugs really get going. And when the hatch gets going, because you got fish that are probably up in the very head of the rift, they could drop back where the feeding's a little easier and a little bit more productive. On this far edge here, we got an inside seam on the trees. That overhead cover is going to give them a little bit of security, and they're going to be back in their feeding too as the hatch gets rolling. So as you can tell, that as the bug activity picks up, the hatch picks up, I'm starting to work my way down the run. The other thing that could be happening is too, down below, there's a lot of fish, especially wild fish, get really keyed in. And oh, by the way, stockfish do the same thing after I've been in the river for a few weeks, on the bug cycles. And sometimes these fish will go down and take cover in the slower water, and those fish in that slower water down in there are going to start moving up into these feeding lanes. So just because you didn't see too much activity, it can build as these fish move in. keep in mind, in this particular piece of water, it's not unusual for these fish to move 100 yards one way or the other in the course of a day when they're feeding and not feeding and resting. So the fish just don't usually stay behind the same rock all their lives. They will move quite a bit. In big rivers, it could be up to a quarter of a mile. In a creek, it could be anywhere from 25 to 200 yards depending on the habitat. All right, now we're moving into the tail out of the pool where it's really glassy. It's a little bit shallower. There's not a lot of surface structure. Everything's pretty smooth. This is the water that you always see on an Orvis catalog or in a fishing magazine where everybody's out, classic what they call fly fishing water. This stuff is an absolute pain to fish. Those fish can see you think about fishing them. I tell you, I've watched fish rise down in this stuff, and I thought about going to them, and just the thought of sneaking down to make a cast to them has put the fish down in this type of water. So this is not my favorite type of water to normally fish. Like all things in fishing, there's always exceptions. The real exception to this water right down here, and where I use it a lot and have great success in this Flatacomber water, is right at dusk into dark on a spinner drop. When there's a lot of bugs on the water, these fish are getting to the slower water where they can just gobble, feed like crazy, and eat, and they don't have to cruise. There's enough food coming after them, and fast enough they can stay in one spot and they can eat. Low light, they feel comfortable, and of course they're just on a food craze. And at that point, you can sometimes move in on these fish. You can move a little bit carefully. Be careful you don't crunch the bottom too much or push much of a wake. You got to be real stealthy, and you can actually get to these fish and have a very good time fishing down here in the evening. This is actually the type of water that I like to fish after dark dry fly fishing. You know, I'll fish a big white wolf, I get the moon glare right on the water, and I've had incredible success and some amazing evenings right at dark in all this glassy water down here. Like I said, it's not my favorite water to fish when it's light out, but at dusk and dark, and when there's a lot of spinners on the water and a lot of bugs on the water, this can be an amazing part of the run to fish. The fish just come out of the woodwork. Even the fish that were up in the head of the pool, right up in here in the head, well, sometimes when there's a lot of spinners, you'll find them starting to drop down into the softer water where it's easier for them to feed more efficiently as they get a little bit more confident in the lower light and they haven't been disturbed. All right, one last point is I showed you where I kind of like how I'd break this pool down, and as a classic hatch would happen, how I'd cover the water through the hatch. Especially I'd kind of focus on an evening hatch, which is pretty much what we do quite often. Now, I talked about where I'll fish, but probably more important in this whole situation is where I'd wade. Everybody's worried about where to fish out on that thing. Sometimes we got to be careful about where we put our feet because we could shut the whole run down. Now, in this situation here, on the far bank is a little bit more of a cut. This is where most of the current is, right along this far bank here, right off the tips of my fingers. That's where most of the fish are. So what I'm going to do is stay as close as I can to all this debris along the edge here, right along here in the slower water here. I'm gonna lay off from that, but they have in the past done some stream restoration where it's just slowing down. Some of this has become fish structure. So keeping that in mind, I might stay out a little bit towards that rock down there and just quietly work back and forth, knowing that some of those fish could be coming out towards the evening off in those rocks and feed. So in this particular run, what I have been doing is working about where the camera is, out towards that rock, but knowing that when I get towards that rock, I'm kind of getting into dangerous water. So if I know I got a good rise on the, I'm gonna have a good spinner drop, I could have a lot of rising fish and the bugs, I might in this case stay out towards that rock and that skinny water and just angle that way to protect that water, while up in the head here stay more this way to protect that water. Allergies. So the trick is to stay in that slower, softer outside water, and then use your casting skills to get into there and just stay well away from that. A lot of these fish, especially where I'm here, these are wild fish, and it does not take much to just set these fish off. And sometimes some of these fish there, once you spook them, they can be spooked for hours. So it's something to keep in mind is not only how do you break down the pool to fish, but how do you break the pool down to wade. All right, we're in a different run pool here, a little bit different structure. And what I want to do is just take a quick moment and just explain how to break this one down too. It's not as much as the classic rift run glassy pool. This one has it's a little shorter, a little bit more compact, and it's got a little bit of built-in structure. So once again, this is pretty much the same principles will apply here as it did in the first stop, but in this stop right here, there's a couple little add-ons that I just wanted to point out. They give you something to think about when you hit the water. This run has a bunch of big rocks in it, aka what I refer to as more structure, and as it creates a lot more dynamics, and the current seems, you know, you've got a lot more different current speeds and everything else on the surface, and all this, lack of a better term, churning around of the different current speeds creates feeding lanes, little niches, and everything else. So very often when you have a prolonged run with a lot of character in it, a lot of different current speeds on the surface, a lot of structure, aka rocks and other types of river debris, or can't quite call it logs and rocks debris, they belong there and they create habitat. And this breakups create one, sanctuary for the fish, two, feeding lanes. So all of a sudden you come into one of these things and you gotta just kind of keep your eyes open and just kind of systematically cover this, because this is all holding water, this is all feeding lanes, this is all sanctuary slash structure that these fish can find comfort from the current and protection and hiding from predators. So in a run like this has a lot of character to it and actually can have a lot of opportunities and a lot of good productive water. Here again, how you approach the pool is pretty important. Now this is in this particular run, once again, you'll notice, I'm going to move the camera over here. Off in this part of the pool, the current's a little faster along the bank, down through there, over the rocks. And you get on this side, once again, the water's just a little softer, up along the tight edge in here. And also a couple places like there where there you go, you can get off the tip of my fingers where the rocks are. That's all skinny, and those fish really don't want to hang up on that side of the river. So what I'm going to do is just stay pretty close, just right off them here, and stay off on those rocks that are just behind me, and just creep along the edge here and just try to just enough room where I can get a cast off from the off the trees. Actually, I do a lot of one-handed and two-handed spay casting here. This is because I want to be so tight against the trees. Sometimes a little bit of a one-hand trout spay cast works really good, because I'm sometimes almost backed up to the trees or hiding around the trees, because these fish will be, as the day goes on, they'll move basically from that fast water up against that bank back this way as they feed, and of course up in this faster water here down to here is where you're going to get a lot of your early hatches, and then they'll get pretty right along that whole bank is where all the activity is, because that's where most of the food gets shoved that way anyways. So we want to stay off in that unproductive, that on food, shallow, that's the type of water the fish want to use. This is where we want to stay. So in this particular spot, once again, we're going to want to stay really close to the bank here, so we don't mess those and disturb those fish. Okay, this was a pretty quick, dirty, muddy approach to how I break down a simple basic pool. Even though this is just a small pool and a small creek, once again, the whole parameters, doesn't matter if you're fishing a small tiny little creek your rod can reach across, or you're in a big river where we have to float. The whole concept still works the same. You know, habitat is habitat, bugs are bugs, fish are fish. Yes, they do move them down the pools, and how you break down a pool through the course of the day. So hopefully this answered a couple of questions, hopefully created a few questions. If you have some questions, leave them down in the comments. I'll try to get to you. If you leave a good enough comment or a good enough question, I might come back and actually shoot a video on it. I love those. So please give us some ideas. So this is just, like I said, just a quick breakdown. I hope it helps. The next time you come up to a pool and you're like, well, where do I start? You'll have an idea. I know a lot of books and magazines have these little diagrams of fish are ready to fish A, B, or C. Me, it depends on the time of the day and what's going on the river more than it does A, B, or C, because the rivers are dynamic, the creek are dynamic, the bugs are dynamic, the fish are dynamic, and a lot of times you got to just get out on the water and take what's happening today into consideration and make the best of it. A lot of it is just working with what's going on, but that's how I generally break down a pool, and that's what's going on. So for an example, this is, I'm thinking sulfurs, Cahill hatches. A little later we'll be dealing with trico hatches, and maybe I'll do, if we get enough bugs and fish, I'll do a trico video, and I'll even talk about why I picked the water that I picked in a trico video. So anyways, I hope this is helpful. If you have any questions, once again, leave them down in the comments. More videos on this is to come, so hit that subscribe and like button. Give us some support. We need it. And see you on the water, folks. Good fishing. This is Jay at JPEG Guides and Lost River Fishing. We are a year-round fly fishing catch and release guide service. We fish the Lake Ontario tributaries, and then during the spring and the summer we also fish the inland trout streams, classic dry fly fishing. During the heat of the summer we will do the warm water fishing for bass and pike. If you're interested in any of our outings or have any questions, please feel free to email us at fish@lostriversfishing.com. Hope to hear from you, and if you have any questions, feel free to contact us.